The sun hung low over Lagos, casting long shadows on the crowded streets of Ojota. Amara, a poised and self-assured 32-year-old, drove through the familiar chaos of Lagos traffic. The rhythm of the city was in her blood. She'd grown up here, mastered the art of dodging potholes and navigating through swarms of pedestrians, but this afternoon felt different. There was an electric tension in the air, something was off. She had just finished a grueling day at work and was eager to get home to her small apartment in Ikeja. As she approached a familiar intersection, her eyes caught sight of a police checkpoint ahead. She slowed her car instinctively, but this wasn't her first rodeo. Not today. It was about 5:30 p.m. and the last thing she wanted was to be stopped at a police checkpoint. But of course, this was Lagos, where police checkpoints seemed to sprout up out of nowhere, like mushrooms after a storm. She could already feel the prickle of unease. Lagos streets were often a playground for unscrupulous officers, ready to seize any opportunity to extort money from unsuspecting drivers. She was not about to be one of them. Amara was no stranger to these checkpoints, where papers were checked, fines were issued, and bribes exchanged. But today, the officers looked different. A seasoned inspector stood at the front, his face marked by an unsettling mix of boredom and authority. His eyes flicked over the traffic like a predator scanning its prey. Amara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to play by their rules. As she neared, the officer raised his hand and signaled for her to pull over. Her grip tightened on the wheel, but she exhaled deeply and eased the car to the side of the road, parking just behind a few other vehicles. Her heart beat faster now, but not from fear. She was preparing for a fight. The officer approached her car with deliberate slowness, his polished boots clicking against the pavement. His uniform was impeccably neat, but his eyes were anything but professional. There was a glint of calculation, a quiet smirk. As he reached the window, he leaned in, blocking her view of the street. "Good afternoon, Ma," he said, his voice oozing faux politeness. "Can I see your car papers?" Amara studied him for a moment, not flinching. She knew the drill. This wasn't about papers. It was about power. Extortion. It was about what they could take from people who didn't know their rights. She didn't respond immediately, taking a moment to compose herself. "What's the issue, officer?" His smile barely faltered. "Routine check. I need to see your papers, please." Her eyes flicked to the other officers behind him, looking on with interest. There was an unspoken understanding among them, a sort of silent approval. They were waiting for her to comply, to hand over the money they'd demand in exchange for her freedom. "Not today. I have all my papers in order," Amara said slowly, her voice low but firm. "But I need to understand why I've been stopped first." The officer blinked. He hadn't expected the resistance. Most people either panicked or just handed over cash. "Ma, you were speeding through the checkpoint. That's why I need your papers. You're in violation." Amara raised an eyebrow. Speeding? She hadn't exceeded the limit. This was a lie. A fabrication. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "I've been driving under the speed limit. I slowed down as soon as I saw the checkpoint." The officer's eyes flickered for a moment. His smirk faded, replaced by a flash of annoyance. He was trying to read her, but she wasn't an easy target. "Do you want me to take you to the station?" he asked, stepping closer to the window, his tone turning colder. "I can charge you for reckless driving. You don't want that trouble, trust me." Amara didn't flinch. This wasn't about trouble. It was about money. She could feel the weight of the officer's presence, the pressure to give in, to submit. But there was no way she was going to do that. She leaned forward slightly, her voice sharp but controlled. "You can't charge me with anything without evidence. You're just making up an offense. And I'm not going to give you 1 naira for your imagination." The officer's face darkened. He wasn't used to this, being challenged, being questioned. The other officers were watching, and he didn't like the idea that he was being put on the spot in front of them. "Are you threatening me, Ma?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "No," Amara replied coolly, meeting his eyes. "I'm simply stating the truth. If you want to charge me for something that didn't happen, you better have proof. Otherwise, I'll be forced to report you for harassment. I know the law. And I will not let you intimidate me." For a moment, the officer stood there, his face twisted with frustration. He had expected her to back down. To crumble. Instead, she stood tall, unyielding. He glanced over at his colleagues, looking for support, but all he saw were a few officers exchanging uncertain glances. It was clear that they weren't on his side. Something in the way Amara held herself, so composed, so defiant, had shaken their confidence. "Listen, Ma," he said after a long pause, his tone more subdued, "I can make this very difficult for you. I can take you to the station right now. You don't know who you're dealing with." Amara didn't move, didn't flinch. She knew exactly who she was dealing with. She had heard the stories, the whispers of corruption and injustice that ran deep in the veins of the Lagos police. But today wasn't about those stories. Today was about drawing a line. "I know who I'm dealing with," she said, her voice quiet but cutting. "And I'm not scared of you. You're not above the law. If you continue this, I will have your actions reported, and I'll make sure you answer for it." The officer's jaw tightened. He was seething now, but he could sense that Amara wasn't bluffing. She wasn't like the others. She wouldn't back down. Amara held his gaze, her face expressionless. Every second that ticked by felt like a test. Would he give in? Would he continue to fight her? The suspense hung thick in the air, a tension so palpable you could almost feel it press against your skin. The officer took a deep breath and stepped back, his gaze flickering between Amara and his colleagues. The seconds stretched on, and finally, he spoke. "All right," he said begrudgingly, "you can go. But remember, Ma, be careful next time." Amara didn't smile. She simply nodded. "I'll remember that." As she rolled up her window and shifted the car into drive, she couldn't help but glance back in the rearview mirror. The officer stood there, his face twisted with frustration, his colleagues still looking at him with mixed expressions. They hadn't expected this. The feeling of victory surged through her, but it wasn't just about this one moment. It was the reminder that standing up for your rights could make a difference. One person, one voice, could change the course of the day. As she merged back into traffic and drove away, Amara knew the road ahead would always be filled with challenges. But now, she wasn't just a driver in Lagos, she was someone who had reminded the system that justice mattered. And that was a power no officer could ever take away.